Hey Dad, look at the waiter's face, isn't it gross? The teenager raised his phone, secretly snapping a photo. The nearby table erupted in muffled laughter. The waiter only lowered his head, silently wiping spilled coffee from the table. Someone muttered, probably a gas explosion or something. But the father froze. He noticed something beneath the waiter's collar. A faded tattoo, belonging to a special forces unit he knew all too well. Type unfair if you believe mocking others is completely unacceptable. Welcome to QH. Let's uncover what really happened. Ethan Cole, 38, had served as a combat medic during the Fallujah campaign. 5 years ago he'd been severely burned while pulling a fellow soldier from a Humvee engulfed in flames after an IED strike. The explosion had left half his face and neck permanently scarred, a roadmap of pain etched into his skin. After his medical discharge, Ethan retreated from military life, avoiding the veterans groups and reunions that might have provided support. He settled in a quiet riverside town, far from anyone who might recognize him, and took a job as a waiter at Riverside Diner, a small establishment where he could earn an honest living while keeping interactions brief. Each day he endured the stares, the whispers, the way parents pulled children closer when he approached their tables. He developed a system: approach from the right side, his less scarred side, speak briefly, place dishes carefully, and retreat. Manager Todd had initially hesitated to put Ethan on front of house duties, suggesting kitchen work instead, but Ethan had insisted. He refused to hide completely. On this particular Saturday afternoon, Ethan was carrying a tray of drinks when he heard snickering behind him. A group of teenagers from the local high school were nudging each other, pointing discreetly. One boy, about 16, raised his phone, pretending to take a selfie while actually capturing Ethan's profile. "Check this out," the boy whispered to his friends, straight out of a horror movie. Ethan heard every word. His hearing had become more acute since the explosion, as if compensating for his other injuries. He kept walking, his face a careful blank, his grip on the tray steady despite the familiar burn of humiliation spreading through his chest. At a nearby booth sat Victor Hale, a retired Army sergeant, having dinner with his teenage son, Ryan. Victor was midway through explaining the college application process when he noticed Ethan delivering water to a neighboring table. The waiter's sleeve pulled back slightly as he reached across, revealing the edge of a distinctive tattoo on his forearm. Victor's fork paused halfway to his mouth. That tattoo, a medic's cross intertwined with an unmistakable unit designation, belonged to the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, his unit in Fallujah. His eyes traveled to Ethan's scarred face, seeing beyond the damage to the features beneath. Recognition dawned slowly, then hit like a thunderbolt. "Dad?" Ryan asked, noticing his father's sudden stillness. "What's wrong?" Victor watched as his son and friends continued snickering at Ethan's expense, taking another photo when the waiter turned away. Without a word, Victor reached across the table and firmly gripped his son's wrist, forcing the phone down. "Ryan," he said, his voice low and deadly serious, "you just did the worst thing I've ever seen you do." The boy's smile faltered. "It's just a picture, Dad." Victor's gaze never left Ethan's retreating form. "That man isn't what you think, not even close. If you believe a good person deserves to be remembered, stay here with us." Victor Hale had served 18 years before retiring to civilian life. He'd been a platoon sergeant during the same Fallujah operations, where Ethan had served as a combat medic. Though they'd been in different companies, Victor knew the stories. Everyone did. They'd called him the doc who carried 4 men through enemy fire. They'd called a young medic, who despite suffering severe burns when their transport was hit, had returned to the burning vehicle repeatedly to extract injured Marines. The last man he'd pulled out had been Lieutenant Nathan Hale, Victor's eldest son. Nathan had survived because of that medic, though he still walked with a limp. And now, incredibly, the same man was clearing tables at a small-town diner, while teenagers mocked his scars. "Ryan, give me your phone," Victor demanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Dad? What's the big deal? We were just..." "Now." Ryan reluctantly handed over his phone. Victor deleted the photos, then stood abruptly. "Stay here," he instructed his son, then approached the manager's station, where a balding man in his 50s was reviewing receipts. "Excuse me," Victor said, the waiter with the burn scar. "Could I speak with him privately?" The manager, Todd, looked uncomfortable. "Ethan's on shift right now. Is there a problem with your service?" "No problem. I need to thank him for something that happened a long time ago." Todd disappeared into the kitchen, returning moments later with a frown. "He says he doesn't want to speak with anyone. He's private about his past." Victor nodded, understanding. Men who'd seen what Ethan had often preferred anonymity to recognition. He scribbled his name and number on a napkin. "Please give him this. Tell him it's from Lieutenant Hale's father. He'll understand." That evening, Victor sat at his computer, staring at the blank comment box of a private Facebook group for veterans of the Iraq campaigns. His fingers hovered over the keyboard before he began typing. Today I saw a hero being mocked while wearing a waiter's uniform. The doc who saved my son and others during Operation Phantom Fury is serving meals in my hometown, enduring ridicule for the scars he earned saving Marines' lives. What have we become, when we fail to recognize the cost of service when it's standing right in front of us? By midnight, the post had been shared 19.7 times across veteran networks. By morning, it had reached several thousand veterans and military families across 3 states. Meanwhile, Ryan's friends had posted their own photos of Ethan online with mocking captions, unaware of the growing storm. Within hours, their post was flooded with comments from veterans and active duty service members, demanding the images be removed and apologies issued. "That's combat medic Ethan Cole," wrote one comment. "You're disrespecting a man who saved more lives in one day than you'll probably impact in your lifetime." Ethan remained unaware of the brewing situation. He worked his Sunday morning shift, keeping his head down as always. But something had changed. Customers were watching him differently, with recognition rather than revulsion in their eyes. Late Sunday afternoon, a letter arrived at the diner, addressed simply to Doc Cole. Inside was a handwritten note. "You carried me 2 kilometers under enemy fire when both my legs were shattered. If you're washing dishes, I'll gladly mop floors. Some debts can never be repaid. How to become a grateful Marine." The manager placed the letter on the break room table, his understanding of his quiet employee transforming with each passing hour. Type on. If you believe no one deserves to be ridiculed for the scars they carry while protecting others. Monday morning brought an unprecedented sight to Riverside Diner. By 7 a.m., a dozen men and women in military dress uniforms were seated throughout the restaurant. They came in quietly, took various tables, and each placed a small card reading, "Thank you, Doc," prominently beside their water glasses. By 8 a.m. the number had doubled. The diner, typically quiet on Monday mornings, hummed with the presence of Marines, Army, and Navy personnel, all sitting with perfect posture, speaking in respectful tones, waiting. Ethan arrived for his shift at 8:30, unaware of what awaited him. He paused at the entrance, taking in the sea of uniforms. His first instinct was to retreat, to walk out and never return to the unwanted attention, but something kept him rooted to the spot. Todd approached nervously. "Ethan, these people, they're here for you. I didn't know." I didn't know who you were." Ethan moved mechanically to the break room, donned his apron, and began his routine. His hands trembled slightly as he filled water glasses, but his face remained composed. As he approached the first table of Marines, a gunnery sergeant rose to his feet and snapped a perfect salute. "Doc Cole," he said, his voice carrying in the now silent diner. "Thank you for not leaving anyone behind that night." Ethan stood frozen, water pitcher gripped tight. The sergeant extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Ethan shook it. One by one, the veterans approached. Some introduced themselves as members of units he'd served alongside, others were simply fellow veterans showing solidarity. A woman in navy dress blues handed him a small box containing a purple heart. "Her father," she explained. He'd been one of the men Ethan had saved, though he'd passed away last year from complications related to his injury. "He made me promise to return this to you if I ever found you," she said softly. He said it belonged to the real hero of Fallujah. By mid-morning, local news crews had gathered outside. Todd, who just days ago had suggested Ethan work fewer front-of-house shifts, because his appearance made some customers uncomfortable, now stood before cameras declaring how honored the diner was to employ such a hero. Victor Hale arrived with both his sons, Ryan and Lieutenant Nathan Hale, the latter walking with a pronounced limp, as he made his way directly to Ethan. "You probably don't remember me," Nathan began. "Third vehicle in the convoy," Ethan replied quietly. "Fractured femur and shrapnel wounds to the lower back. You kept trying to stand up, even with your leg broken." The two men embraced while cameras captured the moment. Nathan turned to his younger brother. "Ryan has something to say to you." The teenager who had photographed Ethan for mockery now stood before him, face flushed with shame. "I'm sorry," he said, voice barely audible. "I didn't know. I was stupid and cruel. There's no excuse." Ethan studied the boy's face. "I forgive you," he said simply. "Just remember, no one chooses how they get wounded, but we all choose how we treat each other afterward." In that moment, Ethan realized that sometimes redemption comes quietly, not through awards or recognition, but in the simple act of being truly seen. The boy who had mocked him now carried the weight of responsibility, and the man who had once hidden his pain stood as proof that dignity can grow in even the harshest shadows. By afternoon, the viral photos had been replaced with new images. Ethan surrounded by veterans. Ethan shaking hands with Nathan Hale. Ethan continuing to serve tables despite the commotion, his quiet dignity evident in every movement. Todd approached him during a lull. Ethan, I need to apologize. When customers complained about your appearance, I should have stood up for you. Instead, I asked you to work less visible shifts. I was wrong. Ethan accepted the apology with a nod. Before closing time, Todd hung a newly printed sign beside the diner entrance. Proud to have American heroes on our staff. Medal of Honor nominee Ethan Cole serves here. As Ethan cleaned tables that evening, Victor Hale lingered, waiting until they were relatively alone. Why here? He asked simply. With your record, you could have any number of positions working with veterans or in military liaison roles. Ethan considered the question carefully. Because here, I'm just Ethan. Not a sad story, not a recruitment poster, not a reminder of the worst day of anyone's life. He paused. Or at least I was. Victor nodded in understanding. Sometimes the weight of heroism was heavier than civilians could comprehend. The next morning, Riverside Diner opened to a line of customers stretching around the block. Veterans, military families, and community members waiting patiently for a chance to shake Ethan's hand, or simply be served by him. The local teenagers who had mocked him were there too, quietly passing out flyers for a fundraiser supporting wounded warriors. Have you ever made the right choice when everyone else walked away? Your story matters too. 1 month later, Ethan received an official letter from the Pentagon inviting him to a ceremony honoring battlefield medics. The letter mentioned the possibility of formally awarding the Medal of Honor that had been recommended years ago, but delayed due to administrative complications. Ethan folded the letter and placed it in his locker at the diner. He had no intention of attending. The recognition, while appreciated, felt at odds with the quiet life he'd built for himself. You're not going? Todd asked when Ethan mentioned declining the invitation. I'm fine right here, Ethan replied. I don't need medals or ceremonies. I just need normal days where people see me, not just my scars or my past. The diner had changed in subtle ways. Customers who had once requested different servers now specifically asked for Ethan's section. Veterans still came regularly, but they respected his preference for normalcy, treating him as Ethan the waiter rather than Doc the war hero. One Tuesday morning, Ethan found a handwritten card placed carefully on his usual break room chair. It read simply, "Your scars are medals we cannot wear for you." It wasn't signed, but he recognized Ryan Wilson's handwriting. Looking through the service window, he saw Ryan and several classmates seated in the dining area. Instead of phones raised to capture his disfigurement, they had notebooks open, carefully taking notes as an off-duty paramedic demonstrated basic first aid techniques. Todd had donated the space for weekly first aid classes inspired by Ethan's service. Seems like the least we could do, he explained with a shrug. Ethan watched the teenagers practice tourniquets and pressure bandages, the same techniques he'd used under fire. The sight stirred something long dormant within him. Perhaps there was value in being visible after all. Scars and all. Honor doesn't reside in medals or uniforms. It lives in those who carry wounds yet harbor no hatred. And sometimes a quiet man clearing tables once held the power of life and death in his hands, preserving the final breaths of an entire platoon. Have you ever been misjudged, based solely on appearance? Share your story because your experiences deserve respect too. Subscribe for more incredible stories, where truth is revealed and honor restored through the simplest of words.